Tetris was the champion, the platinum seller, the celebrity everybody wanted a picture with in those last few years of the 20th century. And while it may not have the prestige of the throne today, it is still inarguably the most accessible game ever released even now. Some variation of Tetris has existed on every video game platform since the first Tetremino landed. But there's a technicality to clear up before anybody tries to take me to court over this, and that's with the term variation. The Tetris family has a lot of cousins that aren't necessarily core Tetris. Tetris in the immediate family is the very sophisticated presentation of squares, gravity, and numbers. You're making lines and hope they give you a high score. It's really nice, isn't it? Simple, coherent. How could you ever make a game like Tetris so uncivilized? Hey, do you want to see me devolve? Peep this out. Tetris with seasoning. The core gameplay can contribute to an entirely new recipe by adding a third dimension, or having you battle against another 100 people who, yeah, get it too. Or maybe you want a very individual experience, in which case you can play Bio Tetris, a sub-mode in Tetris 64 where you clip this little peripheral to your ear, dynamically adapting the game's difficulty relative to the speed of your heartbeat, making Tetris 64 the first game where overdosing on ketamine is a viable speedrun strategy. Obscure releases and iterations are so interesting that quite literally never seen before mechanical differences offer a truly one-of-a-kind experience. It gives a certain level of intimacy that not many games can achieve. I mean, it's not like, not selling well was an intentional design choice, but it's very personal. It feels like a dialogue between you and the developer, rather than you simply being another sales number for the publisher's chart. These one-off variations got me thinking, what is the rarest version of Tetris? Like, out of all the official games from the Tetris company, called Tetris, which is the rarest. Also, even if they don't have a major gameplay gimmick, I'm not counting games like Tetris DX. It has to be plain old, no gimmick, no twists, no branded mascots on the box art, pure vanilla. And let me tell you, this was surprisingly hard to do. Firstly, there's about 20 genuine games titled Tetris. I think it's a little messy, you see. The original version of Tetris was created by a one-man, Mr. Alexei, for the Electronica 60 computer, a computer that was developed within, exclusively for, and locked to the USA, as I'll call it. This version was used as a reference for a newer internationally viable version on IBM PCs and ported from PC-DOS to the likes of MS-DOS, Commodore Amiga, Atari ST, Apple and macOS, and basically every first-generation personal computer had this version, as well as the Tetris Gold compilation for Windows the 3rd. Outside of USA, these versions were published by Spectrum Holobyte. Accurate sales numbers going into today aren't very clear, but there's a confirmed 150,000 copies that was sold within the first 2 years of release, and at least 1 million copies have sold since 1995, according to Spectrum. Anything beyond this date seems like unknown territory, although a safe million definitely gives this game a standing chance in office. It's definitely not the rarity I'm looking for. As for the Electronica original, it was never really distributed further than Alexei's adjacent offices, but a modernized replica is available on the official Tetris website, so considering this is its first official release, even if it's a remake, that means, infinite players. Wow, more people have played this than there'll ever be in your bloodline. Gamers are better than 6, confirmed? So that was the first release of Tetris, but then another company came along known as Rowan Software that developed several other versions for several home computers popular at the time, particularly outside of America, and particularly within the United Kingdom. Spoiler alert, none of these versions are actually the rarest version, but they did not survive the survival of the fittest. These were all published by Mirrorsoft, not Microsoft, and while they're all different In their own special ways, they're generally grouped as one when it comes to the sales data. They are also different in the way they don't give direct answers. The most straightforward statistic I could find was a French book stating tens of thousands were sold in the first few months, and then the author goes on to analyse the Mace Quee Cowboys without any other word of Mirrorsoft's impact. That's not very helpful to our case at all. The Commodore 64 sold 17 million units, and ZX Spectrum alone sold another 5 mil. Tens of thousands of sales in a couple hundred days. That does not represent years worth of these consoles being on the market. They have an enormous legacy. In the UK, these are as big as Nintendo and Sega. I checked through tens of magazines, websites, and otherwise, and found absolutely nothing of help. None of these games are featured in a hits compilation or branded as platinum sellers. The best I can confirm is tens of thousands of sales in an unspecified time frame, less than 12 months. Although, I'd guess no more than 6. I mean, that's not a bad trajectory for that time span. It's just a very limited one. I'm also going to throw a reference to the MSX in here. That computer sold about 9 million units. Tetris existed on it, but the written words of a time gone by won't tell me anything more than that. Also, keep in mind bootleg copies of software for old-timey computers were incredibly rampant, so whatever the official sales number was, the amount of copies out there is going to be exponentially higher, meaning technically there's a lot of unaccounted customers out there, but there's also of course tampers with the official sales numbers. Hopefully, whatever is up next is much simpler to look through. Game Boy Tetris, the most popular game of the 90s, this one is still in active distribution through Nintendo Switch Online, so any existing sales data doesn't really matter honestly. It is available, but for the sake of stats, this version sold 40 million copies. It's not rare. I found a copy stuck to my shoe while I was walking here. A little more interesting is the lesser known, but still well known brother of Game Boy Tetris, the NES version. This is usually the one played at tournaments and still sold a respectable 8 million copies. The Nintendo duo have an illegitimate cousin, Tengen Tetris, another NES release that was created by Atari, while they didn't have the rights to use the Tetris property. A AAA bootleg, huh? Around 100,000 copies were sold within the month of release, prior to being pulled from the shelves, but it's understood that 500,000 copies were produced. They're probably chilling in the scrapyard with E.T. Tengen Tetris does continue to legally exist in arcade form though. They're actually surprisingly common.
Get a load of this guy.
Finally, there's Sega's Tetris, another arcade version made for the Japanese market. It was the highest grossing arcade cabinet of 1989, it stayed a part of the public zeitgeist via conversion kits throughout the mid-90s, and maintains that relevancy throughout Asia today, and I've seen it around in the UK too. That's not a number, but it's clout. That isn't rare to come by. There is an incredibly rare Mega Drive/Genesis version of the game that was licensed through Atari. That got cancelled because Atari still didn't own the rights to Tetris. I don't know why they tried. It was practically the same as the arcade version, just ported to home consoles, so despite only 4 known cartridges being out there, I feel like it's a little unjust to call this the rarest version of Tetris. That specific format is rare, undoubtedly, being on a Sega cartridge. This is the rarest version of Tetris, but the base that is Sega Tetris is still rampantly popular in Sega's hometown arcades, plus is it really official if it wasn't correctly licensed? It's a hard conversation to have with my parents trying to explain this, but thankfully Sega saved us. Sega launched the Mega Drive/Genesis Mini in 2019 with a new version of Tetris based on the arcade game but with additional features, and they essentially fused the cabinet and the unreleased cartridge versions together. It is technically a new adaptation, but they made sure to put up a parade implying this lost and rare Tetris is back, boosting its sales another 300,000 and onwards. Tetris on smartphones, as least as of 2024, completely automates the game and therefore dismantles the fundamental structure that is Tetris. It could maybe be justified if the game had a wacky subtitle like Tetris Quick Drop or Tetris Dash, something that works on mobile, but nah, it masquerades as something comparable to the original Tetris, while it simply isn't. With that in mind, it is called Tetris, it is official, and being a free download with over 10 million downloads, it is not rare. Amazon Fire TV has a free-to-download version of Tetris. It's standard Tetris in the jovial style of mid-2010s colour-popping mobile graphics. You know what I'm talking about. There was a version of Tetris built into the Ericsson T68 and T28 mobile phones. Those sold several million. Congratulations, Eric. EA had a few versions of the game between mobile systems and Sony's at the time relevant gaming consoles, once again being free to play, but also having 100 million paid downloads. What the f***? And finally, a version on the Nintendo 3DS sold about 500,000 physical copies and was plentiful available as a digital download until 2015. But while it was known by its father's name of Tetris in Europe, it's more commonly known as Tetris Axis elsewhere in the world, so I'll give it an honourable mention, but ultimately, I'm sorry it has to go down this way. And now, with a lot of statistics and some educated guesswork, here's a rough look at the sales data for Tetris across computers, consoles, and otherwise. What do we do with this information now? Well, honestly, nothing. These versions just aren't the rarest. They're good for reference, but not the rarest. And let me tell you about two systems in particular. One handheld and one not. Firstly, the handheld. This is the Wonderswan Color, a Japanese exclusive handheld from the mind of Gunpei Yokoi, mostly known for being the designer of Nintendo's Game Boy. The system itself sold just barely over 1 million units, and its version of Tetris is untracked. I couldn't find a lot of Wonderswan sales data. The closest I got to seemed to be a top 70 list, and Tetris didn't make it, so I can only assume the title sold less than 1,000 copies, as number 70 reached 1,024. But I can't say this as a definitive fact, unfortunately. Although online resellers do place the game at the fair price of... The game itself is a very standard release of Tetris, but very vibrant, very stylized, with gameplay being quintessential Tetris. Unfortunately, that doesn't leave much to talk about beyond its beauty regime, which is demure and slaying, I think. Meanwhile, over on that home console is a Tetris so bold that it claims to be a prophet raising from the ocean floor from boot up, but its reality is a somber tale of a shipwreck. This is Tetris for the CDI, a console that supposedly sold a little over 1 million units, but I'm doubtful about that since everybody only knows it for YouTube poops. There may be no exact sales data, especially for the software, but this console didn't sell, so I can only assume it's a rare version, being one of the few acclaimed games on the system. But that's about as impressive as meeting another human with skin. It's good that you have it, you really can't screw this up, but you know, everybody else has it too, so it's not quite as impressive as you'd think. Fittingly for the CDI, this version of Tetris is displayed on a tombstone, against quite an array of elaborate backgrounds: a tranquil river, a mountainous view, the set of Breaking Bad, the set of this video, white. You know, Tetris is a nice pastime, a juxtaposition of something relaxing yet intense to play through when you've got the right conditions, and these backgrounds exemplify that. Can you think of anything more luxurious than an oasis? No? Well, I edited these trees and water in. How at peace do you feel now? How luxurious is a winter's day in hell to you? While mostly static, some small features are animated in each setting, usually grass. I'll give you a moment to find it, and sometimes it blends the game board into the environment. Like, damn, I feel so immersed, that tree looks just like mine. Also, a little bit of a tangent, but the actual composition of these scenes is pretty clean, having a well-defined background complemented by minimal foreground detail so the game board is brought to focus, while the world is framed around the board as if it were made to fit the game board. Now, unless I'm carving a game of tic-tac-toe into that tree, the woodland seems to give that big oak a lot more prestige than the, at the time, 50 million seller that is Tetris. Also, you know that iconic Tetris theme? Yeah, well, this game forgoes it in favour of a wholly original soundtrack akin to being put on hold by a support line. In all honesty though, this score is what gives this version of Tetris any kind of accolade, and I'll stand up to that and speak for it as well. Ears don't often take in serenity like this. But usually when I'm trying to reach peace, I'm not freaking out over all the misplaced Tetreminos. Yes, time to talk about the Squares and Gravity game itself. When I started playing this game, it was a great time, flawed by its controller, but enjoyable when adjusted to and you work around that. Oh god. So, the CDI controller. The basic controller has 2 buttons and a very finicky D-pad. 1 button rotates and 1 hard drops pieces. Issue is, only having 1 rotate button means you've got to go around 270 degrees to reach some positions, and likely more if you overshoot. This isn't terrible to adjust to at the slower speeds, but semi-related, you can't rotate blocks against walls, leaving you stuck. Or, you know, a better word that rhymes with that. And the other button is the hard drop, and that's a bit of a pace breaker. If you look at Game Boy Tetris, this allows you to drop blocks faster, but not instantly, and you don't have to commit to the bit. Then later games introduced the hard drop, instantly putting a Tetremino to the ground, and you know, speedruns like it, but the option to drop just a bit faster rather than instantly is still there too. CDI Tetris, however, only has hard drops, which doesn't sound too bad, just get good, right? Yeah, well, if you want to do a T-spin or just slot a piece into a sheltered home, just go have a drink or eat some pizza while you wait. It's a prime speedrunning strategy, I hear. When the game naturally speeds up as you level up, precision is up to a random chance with the state of the CDI controller, and for reference, I'm wholeheartedly trying to set the date in this system menu, but I can't, because no matter what direction I aim for, the controller seems to drift diagonally. I love the touch that every speed up pauses the game to focus on a cave painting of the next level, by the way. Good pacing, Philip. Other options include turning off seeing the next block and having the match start with some garbage blocks built up for extra challenge. And that is the rarest version of Tetris, as far as I can tell. At least the second rarest, depends on the Wonderswan. So, yeah, to avoid ending on a downer, here's Nugget Tetris! Released from McDonald's promotion exclusively to China, there's a confirmed 500,000 produced, and no more shall come to be. Goodbye!